Hello, winners, and welcome to Two for the Win with your hosts, Nick and Will. Have you ever wondered what it's like to travel as an international news correspondent? Well, you are in luck. Today we have a special guest for you, but before I pass it over to my best friend and co-host Nick to introduce our special guest, let's make sure you subscribe, share, and follow Two for the Win on all the major platforms. I want to give a shout out to Nick Menard and Associates with Dream Vacations for sponsoring today's episode. Without further ado, let me hand it over to Nick.
Thank you so much, Will. I'm so excited today because we have someone that I think you guys will love to hear from. So who is our special guest today? He's a Peabody and DuPont award-winning journalist and digital media visionary, renowned for his compelling true crime storytelling that captivates audiences and drives engagement around the world. Those awards are considered the broadcast TV equivalent of the Oscar and the Pulitzer, just to put this into perspective. With a deep understanding of how people consume online media, he crafts narratives that not only inform but also resonate on a personal level. His expertise spans professional writing, video production, and presentation training, making him a versatile content creator who speaks the language of business. His approach is fast, efficient, and effective, ensuring that each true crime story he tells not only conveys fact, but also sells idea. It's our pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Robert Griggs. Here we go. Thank you so much for joining us today, Robert.
Nick, where were you when I was on television? But you would have been the perfect agent.
Oh my God! Wait, can someone record this? Oh wait, that's recorded.
We'll edit that out.
No, seriously, Robert. I know you are very busy, so we appreciate you joining us today for Wanderlust Wednesday episodes. And the goal for the winners or audience, it's really for you to understand. From someone like Robert who traveled around the globe for his work and personally, to share some experience that he had in different countries, different continents. So very excited for the next 25-30 minutes here with you, Robert.
Well, I was 3 decades in front of the camera as a news correspondent, did a lot of traveling. But I'll share with you some of the experiences where it really does help to understand and know the culture before you go in. I'll never forget, we were on a 727, my crew and I, headed down to Tegucigalpa in Honduras, and we were covering the Contra War. In those days, I covered the White House. President Reagan had a proxy war going against the Soviets in Nicaragua, and the Contras are really the CIA army that was attacking them. But we're on this 727. Listen, it's a hand-me-down from years ago from American Airlines. You look at this, you're like, are the wings going to stay on? But, after we got out of the States, some natives from Honduras decide that they're going to cook in the aisle. And they start firing up a gas-fired burner to cook. My producer got up and went, "This is not happening while we're on this flight. We've covered too many air crashes where they caught on fire."
Wow.
But, one of the interesting experiences about cultural differences, we were going to Choluteca Gap, which is the desert of Honduras. It butts up against Nicaragua, and President Reagan had sent the Texas National Guard's armored units down there for military exercises, really kind of as a saber rattling. So it was hot. I mean, it was really, really hot. And so I'm wearing my Indiana Jones hat. Okay,
I want a picture.
And I'm getting ribbed about it. Look like Indiana Jones. I've got a picture. I'm riding on one of the Bradley fighting vehicles up on the turret, and I've got my red scarf on and my Indiana Jones cap. But I kept noticing when we'd come back into Tegucigalpa, everybody is staring at me. Everywhere I go, staring. And I thought, well, it's the American. And finally, our fixer. In television, you always have a person on the ground that's called the fixer. They know the culture. They know how things get done. She pulls me aside and she says, "Robert, you need to trash the hat. Here's why everybody is staring at you. here in Tegucigalpa, homosexuals wear the cap and the hat.
Oh, you're kidding.
I was like, oh my God, I'm not in that category. Although there's nothing wrong with it.
So that's the day you came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. That's
go figure.
Yeah, that's definitely a great story. So looking at all the plays, we cannot talk about every single plays, unfortunately, or maybe in future episodes. But what would be the top 3 places that you ever traveled to that was such a shock culturally, probably, or something that is still memorable to this day that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, I was in Saudi for the first Gulf War, and then in 2003 I was an embedded reporter for CBS in Iraq, which the invasion was launched out of Kuwait. There was nothing that shocked me about it except getting shot at. So we, it was interesting. As an embedded reporter, you had special credentials. Having experience with the military and working on a defense committee in Congress years earlier, knew that they could assign the equivalent of a military rank to you that would be on your ID. And so I had mine put down as a colonel, so that anybody, some sergeant or media minder started giving me any problems, I'd like, do you see, you're looking at this ID here on me? I outrank you. And they were like, oh my God. But, there it was the uncertainty, the violence of war. And that was really the first time that in a war zone I'd been shot at up close and personal, like from, 50, 100 yards away.
Wow.
And you're in a foreign land, and I remember a moment that we were up in the sort of center of Iraq, headed toward Baghdad. And by the way, I was with a Patriot missile unit. There was believed there was a huge weapons of mass destruction threat to shoot down Scuds. They believed that Saddam was going to fire Scuds with chemical weapons. Now, the interesting thing about this is that I originally was supposed to embed with the 101st Airborne. They're air mobile, and you go in helicopters. And after spending time with them, I met General Petraeus, who was their commander. We got to talking about the crew and I always referred to the equipment we carry in television as my 150-pound pencil. It's that goes around with you to record everything. And we decided, guys, if we're going to really easily get killed coming out of one of these helicopters. So I knew from Gulf War the Patriots would play a major role. And I was like, they'll be standing off. They won't be really in the line of fire. It'll be great television at night. Little missiles going, what great place. And we embedded. And no one had chosen to embed with the Patriots. Nobody was interested. It wasn't sexy, so to speak. And so we embedded with them. We spent time with them at their base in Fort Bliss and get to know them. And then we fly with the last unit out of Fort Bliss to Kuwait. And then in Kuwait, you went into the northern part of Kuwait, into the desert, where there were all these staging camps for the invasion. And we went to a place named Camp Virginia. Some were named after the original colonies and other things. But we arrive, and since this is really a techie group, they have these mobile trailers that are pulled by, overland vehicles that are command post. And the lieutenant colonel, the commander of the battalions, asked us to come in. He sent everybody out, and he says, well, I got to tell you something, guys. Our whole mission has changed. We're not going to be back at the rear protecting cities or ammo dumps. We're going on the tip of the spear. They have decided that the 101st Airborne cannot come into Iraq until we get up into Iraq and put up air cover, because they're afraid of getting slimed. And we've done the estimates. We believe we're going to suffer a lot of casualties. The intelligence is that the desert has been seeded with anthrax. You're going to need to get anthrax shots here. But he said, look, I understand if you want to go home, that you had bargained this, you want to pull out. And, my videographer had been a combat photographer with the Marines in Gulf One, and my producer had been all over. He'd been on the West Bank, and we're like, what? Go home? Are you kidding me? We live for this. We live for this.
Yeah.
And so, that was sort of the subtle surprise. And then, we took off, and we're at the lead, and, really all hell broke loose. I remember bringing briefings before we went, and they were like, oh, you're going to be welcomed. It's going to be like rose petal parades for you guys coming in. And I looked at a guy who'd been in Special Forces. Now he was the medic with this unit. He'd been in there in Gulf One. I said, Lieutenant, what do you think about that? And he went, or Captain. He was like, that's the biggest BS I've ever heard. No way. No way. And so I'll never forget, we're up the center, and we're skirting around a village. And there are kids out playing, but the men and women are all sitting, and we're about 50 yards from them and staring. And there's no welcome. There's no anything. And we'd told, no, they're going to be really happy we're here. And we're thinking, uh-oh. Well, the command sergeant major in the Humvee in front of us had this big bundle of small American flags. And everybody was under strict orders. You were not to show the flag. You weren't supposed to wear the flag, show the flag, because we were supposed to be known as not as invaders. Not as invaders. And I'd looked at him and said, boy, Sergeant Major, you can get yourself in trouble with these flags here. No, he said, you're behind me. I want you to watch and tell me what happens. Well, he would stick a flag out the window, and kids would run up and take it. And they would run back to the adults, throw it on the ground, and the adults would spit on it and stomp on it. And I was like, uh-oh. And meanwhile, my former Marine has gotten on the roof of the Humvee, shooting video of going there, and it's close to sundown. And there are buses passing us, ramshackle buses, and they're full of young males. And he hollers down, he says, guys, I can see down in the bus, and the floorboards are loaded with AK-47s and RPGs. And I went, oh. So we got the convoy to stop, and we told the command sergeant major this, look, guys, they're going down the road they're going to ambush us at sundown. And you need to do something about this. He goes, are you telling me that a CBS correspondent is urging me to fire? And I said, that's about the size of it, because it's self-survival out here. And he said, well, under our rules of engagement, they have to shoot at us first. And I was like, oh, God, here we go. And sure enough, nightfall, and it's pitch black. I mean, you in the desert, you can't see your hand in front of you. It's that dark. We're on a very narrow, hardtop road that's, like a county road here in Texas. But we're in the Euphrates River Valley, and each side of the road, it looks like it's dry, but it's not. It's this sandy loam. If you go in it, you're stuck. So there's nowhere to go. And here's this long convoy. And oh, by the way, footnote, these are all techie soldiers. These weren't riflemen, And so for force protection, they had recruited a National Guard unit from your home state, Florida, who were jungle fighters, and they did all their training in Panama. They'd never been in the desert.
Yeah, a little different.
Yeah. So, and all they have is a 50 caliber machine gun, and we've got M16s in the vehicles. Before we kicked off, a captain came to us and said, guys, I really want to put M16s in your vehicle. And under the embedding agreement, you agreed you would not be a combatant. That was part of the deal. And our producer, who was a rule follower, was like, absolutely not, can't do it. And I said, look, my cameraman and I, we've both been with the military. We know how to use the M16. Just take me out here and refresh my memory on how to unjam it, because we're in the desert. We do that. Get on down the road, and all hell breaks loose. And it's an ambush. And the gunfire at night, it's tracers. And it looks like fire hoses going back and forth. You know, you got a hose with fire. And it's not going well. And you can't get out of the vehicle because you can't see and everything. Well, a lot of units had gotten lost in the desert coming across because the invasion actually started days earlier than it was supposed to. It was like the Cannonball Run going across the desert. I mean, they were, gosh, behind us was 3rd Infantry, and I think there were 12,000 vehicles behind us coming across the desert for that division. And so all this is going on. These 3 young kids had a self-propelled howitzer, and they'd been lost, tagged along, and thank God they, we're getting hammered, and they decided you couldn't see anything, you really couldn't hear this gunfire so loud. They pulled up between the Humvee in front of us and our Humvee and lowered their barrel point blank, which, they're usually firing a 155 round a mile or something. They lowered it point blank to shoot it out about 300 yards and 100 yards. And we didn't know this. You can't see this. And suddenly the first round goes off, and a fireball goes across our Humvee, the one in front of us, and our Humvee comes off the ground.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. It comes off the ground in the air. And when we kind of recoup, I looked at the cameraman, and I said, is that incoming or outgoing? And he went, boss, I don't know. And suddenly the next round, he goes, that's outgoing. And this went on for a considerable piece of time. And what happens is it sends a shockwave out. And you would almost have arrhythmia every time they fired. And the 3 of us were in fetal positions, crouched down in the Humvees, bracing for the next round, like, God, I hope this ends. So we were so close, the rounds would explode, and the dirt would come back rain over our vehicles and stuff. So, but we made it through it. We got out of it. Everything was great. And the next morning, sunup, we see these guys on their 155 millimeter. And I looked at them and said, guys, did you realize you were shooting over between our Humvees over the hoods? And they went, oh yeah, hey, every time we fired around, we'd all start laughing and said, I bet it scared the shit out of those guys. I said, well, it definitely did that. Yeah. And so the final note on this is that captain who had offered to put M16s in our units, we had told him, look, if things get bad, we'll find an M16. He comes back around. He said, look, after last night, guys, I really wish you would consider. And our producer, who had been, oh, no, goes, right now, I want the M16. Let's go out here, show me how to shoot the M16. I want 50 rounds right now. He became a convert.
Yeah, funny how that brings them along. Wow.
But it was a great experience. It was kind of, in one sense, I call the Band of Brothers experience, because before the war ever kicked off, you're living with everybody, you're sleeping with everybody, you know everybody. Now, what made it hard is later we suffered casualties. And as a reporter, when, I'd be out, I'd seen plenty of dead bodies in all my career, but I did not know them. And there's sort of always a detachment in the reporters on the street, and, there's a gallows humor about it, kind of protects you from it. But this was different. We knew all these kids, and it was hard. It really was hard. It really hit you, as it did the whole unit. So that was an experience I hadn't had. And, at one point we got hit by friendly fire. We were up in the middle of Iraq, and the Air Force has a mission they're called Wild Weasels. And they carry the HARM missile. It's a radiation-seeking missile. And their job is to fly ahead of the fighters and bombers and get the surface-to-air missile sites to turn on their radars. And the moment they do, boom, that missile hones in and follows that wherever that signal came from. Well, no one realized that our radar for the Patriot missiles there had the same electronic signature similar to a very deadly Soviet weapon system they had. And all the pilots have been told, hey, the moment you get that tone in your cockpit, fire and forget, or you're dead. So here we are. There'd been a sandstorm. It had lifted. We all come out, and we're in a semicircle around the battalion commander when the world exploded. And it was like a firecracker was put in your ear to go off in a blinding white flash. And there was a moment we all thought we were dead. We're like, yeah. And then you come back, and for a period of time, we thought it was a mortar attack or something. And then time passes, and I'm actually on my knees doing a report while everybody else is down ready to shoot. Wow. But we start looking around, and they start finding some pieces of shrapnel and everything, and which I've got one in my office and it turns out I recognize it. I had done a story years ago about the HARM missile, and I went, that's a piece of one of our missiles, a HARM missile. That was friendly fire, guys, and sure enough, it was. There was a big investigation. And fortunately for us, the missile had misfired. The missile was supposed to go off above us and shower us with thousands of titanium needles. Ooh. And they're designed to shred all the electronics and everything. And they had gone through the radar system and the trailer and everything that it's in, and you went inside there, and guys had packs of cigarettes, and they were now it was just sitting there, a lump of tobacco just sitting there, just ready. But for us, it went over the tops of our helmets, and I've got a piece that skimmed over my helmet. So it was the good Lord was looking after Robert and company that day. But what happened to me, that sonic wave from it, I was standing close to it, and it clobbered my inner ear. And for another year, it sounded like a telephone was ringing in my head all the time.
For a full year? Oof.
Yeah. And then, after that, I couldn't think straight. And the producers and all were like, what the heck are you writing? What is this? And so we pulled out and went over to the 101st Airborne, and then eventually pulled out, went back to Kuwait doing stuff because I was trying to get it back together. One of my biggest regrets today is that I just didn't gut it up, all of that, stay, and go all the way to Baghdad with them. But at that point, the crew was looking at me like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a story there. Winners, if you want to go to Baghdad or Iraq, I have the perfect person to build an itinerary for you and tell you where to go and maybe where not to go. But I would like for another story. I would really like you to tell us something a little bit more passionate, a little bit more.
No,
that was flat. That was very flat. No, I mean, I thank you for sharing that, Robert. And we can only imagine, like we are. I mean, I never been to war, you neither. So for us, it's like.
Well, not outside my household. My wife sometimes
She has throwing grenades. Well, I do have a story about, when in Rome and follow the rules of the Romans. Yeah. When we were in Kuwait. As we would exit this kind of hardtop road to go to the desert, there was the Ali Asalim Kuwaiti Air Force Base. And they were extremely sensitive about it because in the first Gulf War, Saddam had taken the base commander, his wife, his children, and others, cut their throats and hung them by their feet from the arch for the entrance. Mm-hmm. And one of the things the Army had told me was that whatever you do, Robert, don't take any photographs, nothing. Don't get that video camera out around here. They will come after you. They're crazy, sensitive about it. Well, you might know, we're sitting there waiting for some other Army members of the unit to go back to the desert, and I hear the sound of rotor blades, and off in the distance, here come the Marines, and they were still flying the old Hueys. And it's that egg beater sound. And I look up, and it's like a scene from Apocalypse Now. the sky is filled with them. And impulsively, I grab my still camera and start taking pictures of this moment. And the next thing we know, we look up, and here are these Kuwaiti soldiers running toward me, grab me, take me into custody. The army guys, the captains and stuff, will look and go, "You're on your own, Robert." And my crew is like, "Oh my God, how are we going to explain this?" And so I'm taken back into a tent. Sitting at a table in a tent is a Kuwaiti general and his assistants. And I always, when I covered terrorism, did anything overseas, I always introduced myself as being from Texas, not the United States, because I'd learned a long time ago there was still the mystique about Texas. They think we're all cowboys and oil men, and I am a cowboy, as you can see over here.
Yeah.
But when I said that we didn't speak each other's language, but when I said I was from Texas, he understood and he went, "Texas? Texas?" And then he says, "Dallas Cowboys?" And I went, "Dallas Cowboys." And I start motioning, like passing and everything. And so then we have this, we have this, motions and hand motions of conversations, Texas and all that. And then he motions for the guy to release me, hands me the camera back, and here I come out. And more Army guys had gathered, and they're going, "Oh my God, what? We thought you were off in the gulag somewhere." And I went, "No, no." And I said, "Oh, by the way, I've got the camera." And they went, "They didn't rip your camera apart?" "No, no." And they went, "How'd this happen?" "Pays to be from Texas."
There you go.
Now,
how about them Cowboys?
I think the story of the whole episode is that Dallas Cowboys, it's literally the love language. It's the language that will get you out of any issue worldwide, even in period of war like this one.
Yeah.
I love it.
Only in the 90s, not since.
No, it's still there.
Thank you, Robert.
My wife and I were in London, and we were in a cab, and we're talking to each other, and the driver says, "Do I detect a Texas accent?" And "You certainly do." And he goes, "Well, how's JR and the boys doing?"
Yeah.
And my wife looks at me and, "Well, they're doing great, and all this." And we were like, "Oh my God, they're still showing that show over here, and they still think JR and all this,
Yeah, in Belgium, no, because at the time when I left to 11 years and a half ago, football was absolutely not part of the sport culture. Now it's getting there with all the games in London, Germany, and stuff like that. But the first time I went to Dallas when I moved to the United States, I posted something about the fact that I'm in Dallas. All the comments from my friends from Belgium was about JR. And about who killed him. So it was like, yeah, it's still the thing that people know in a lot of places in Europe. It's the show Dallas. So it's pretty impressive that after, when was that
late 70s,
yeah,
early 80s?
So and it's still in people's mind, even young generation, because they keep showing them year after year. So
one of the things I learned from this was that we decided it was really important to show our children other cultures in the world. Mm-hmm. So when our son and daughter were like 7th grade, 5th grade, we started a deal that every Christmas Eve, we didn't have the big Christmas presents and all. Every Christmas Eve, we got on a flight to a foreign country. And it was all to be about learning. And in the lead up to it, each member of the family was to learn a little history of where we're going and tell the others about it. And they loved it so much, we started doing it in spring break as well, sometimes in a summer trip. And, my kids are now young adults, 35, 32, and they thank us to this day, like, "Dad, this was such an experience and taught us so much." And, they learned about other cultures, and they learned that, why people have a different opinion than Americans. Some people couldn't understand the French, why they didn't support the invasion of Iraq. And remember, we were complaining about French fries. But if you know the history of certainly World War I and World War II, what they went through, their cities and country being invaded, Well, you can understand then, yeah, they're going to be a little reluctant. They're going to think this through. So it was a great experience. The first trip we took our kids on, we went to Paris, the major sites, but then we went to Normandy. And my wife's family lost two sons during the D-Day invasion, one of which is buried in Normandy. The other one, the mother was extremely distraught and wanted him brought home. But, we took our kids to Normandy, and anyone listening, it's a very, very moving experience to think about all these young men, what they did and sacrificed. My uncle, who I'm named after, he came into Normandy about 40 days after the invasion with part of Patton's army. And so, we took them down the coast to Point du Hoc, and this is where Rudder's Rangers, Colonel Earl Rudder, scaled those cliffs. Now, well, I had a connection because my freshman year at Texas A&M, and A&M had been a military institution for years, Earl Rudder was the president. Oh. And, as a young snot-nosed kid, you're like, it's the old general. Well, when I went to Point du Hoc and I looked over it, I went, oh, God, this was a great man. This is unbelievable. But what was really interesting is that it was the one place, that all of the craters from the bombs are still there, and the bunkers and everything. And so I looked down, and my seventh grader and fifth grader, they're playing chase up and down through the craters. And I just thought for a moment, God, if those boys from my wife's family could see this today, and our deal was, look, you're here because there were some members of your family made the sacrifice,
Right. Absolutely.
So it had an impact. But we've traveled extensively around Europe and Japan, and it just broadened our kids' horizons, and us too. My wife and I last year were in India. Went to see the Taj Mahal in Agra, Delhi, and I have to tell you, it was an amazing experience. I mean, amazing, because I never had experienced anything like that. I mean, I thought in Latin America I had seen poverty and stuff on a scale. Until you're in India. Yeah. But then on the other side, you see the tech side of India. And then when you start learning the history and what, there were the advances and things that were going on there way in front of us. And then we began to learn how the British, with the East India Company, had just looted the country. And, here in the States, our history, I think, was more oriented toward Western history, Greece, Rome, and you don't get that part of the world. And it is a fascinating story. So again, we really learned something, came back, really started reading more about it, because it's just interesting, the human dilemma and march of history.
So much to learn and so much to experience in the world, and I think we will need to have you back at some point. Sorry about that, because you have. I know it was only 30 minutes here, but I think you can really put a lot of things into perspective. I love what you share about your kids that you took away, to in certain destinations. Traveling, it's not about the destinations. Mainly, it's about the experiences and what you can learn from different places you go to. I truly believe so. So, thank you, Robert. Again, sorry to cut it short, but we could continue to talk for hours.
We could listen for hours.
So thank you for pouring so much to our winners today. I really appreciate you very much, and appreciate everything that you share with us today.
Well, thank you. And, people can hear and read about my journeys on my website, truecrimereporter.com. And the podcast is on all the podcast channels wherever you listen to podcasts and YouTube.
Make sure to check the description.
Yeah, we will put in the description. You can see Robert's website, Robert's podcast, who is fantastic.
Yeah.
I started listening to it a few weeks ago, and I make sure to at least listen to one every single week. But I go over a lot of time because I love it. So thank you, Robert, for everything again.
Well, thanks for having me.
And we will talk back very soon, I'm sure.
Have it back. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
So what a fascinating story. And we only scratched the surface. We had the pleasure of meeting Robert at a Podfest convention. And if you thought these stories were compelling, this gentleman has amazing stories. So we hope you found it interesting. We'll definitely look to have him back on in a future episode about some of his other travels and experiences. So big shout out and thank you to Robert Griggs. Please be sure to check in the description if you want to listen to more of his podcast, as well as all the other things that he's done in his career. Quite fascinating. So that'll wrap us up for today's episode. Please be sure to join us next week on Wanderlust Wednesday. Again, please be sure to subscribe, share, and follow. And thank you to Nick Menard and Associates with Dream Vacations for sponsoring today's episode. That'll be all for now, winners. Take care. See you soon.